Let's have a lesson and discussion on this work. Follow lesson for free and just pick up all the tips from the video. But if you're interested, I do have a sheet music edition of this work, and there's a link for that in the description. So this piece, Lección No.4, is a little tremolo study, and it was actually a suggestion by one of my website followers, one of my YouTube followers, to offer a tremolo work that is a little bit more on the intermediate side of things. So this piece, in terms of its length, it's quite a bit shorter than lots of tremolo works, and the left hand requirements are pretty minimal. So pretty easy left hand requirements, definitely just at the intermediate level. Tremolo itself is a little bit of an advanced technique, but this certainly offers the intermediate student an opportunity to work on a tremolo piece without having to deal with the some of the more advanced left-hand work of the larger tremolo works that are so established in the repertoire. If you look at the original, Sagreras lists P-I-M-I pattern, but I'm using P-A-M-I, just the normal tremolo pattern. But he does mention in his notes that to practice it in a number of different fingerings, including that one. So if depending on what edition you look at, you might see different right-hand fingerings, but I'm definitely using the traditional one, but you're welcome to practice it. I think like P-A-M-I is the most successful, of course, but practicing it in a variety of different fingerings is a really great thing to study as well. I have lots of tremolo lessons on the website. You can go, I'll put a link in the description about this as well, but actual lessons on tremolo technique. But today we can't get into an entire lesson on tremolo technique, but we will be going through this piece a little bit more. But let me tell you a few things that I do when I start a tremolo piece, and some ways that I actually practice the tremolo piece as well, aside from like tremolo technique that we would also be practicing regularly on the side. So the first thing is that the repeated notes in a tremolo piece are the melody. It gives the illusion of continuous sustain. So your goal is to, well, first to play the melody on its own, thinking of it as a basic melody. So you might just want to turn it into an eighth note pattern. So you just play the upper notes as if they were eighth notes. So you want to make sure that your ear is really listening for the melody. When you repeat the notes, even though you have these kind of bass lines which are interesting harmonically, they outline some chords, they're not really the focus. You want to keep your ear and your focus on that upper repeated note, and let that guide you as the melody of the piece. Now, in terms of tremolo technique, if you play the piece slower, the slower it can be a little bit tricky to really highlight that upper note as something that's continuous sustained, but nevertheless, that's still your job, regardless of what tempo you take. So if you take a slower tempo, you're gonna have to put more effort just like into really like putting all of your musical energy into the upper lines, making it all sound very sweet and nice. If you play it a little bit faster, you can think about more in terms of like long, like getting through the phrase a little bit more. And utilizing rubato in a more dramatic way probably. But nevertheless, regardless of what tempo you take, you have to make it sound musical, and you can do that by focusing on that melody. So that's like some musical context about how we're looking at this piece. In terms of how I practice it, well, I went through and tracked the melody first, like I showed you before, and made sure I knew what that melody was. And then I started to play it just as chord forms, so kind of playing each eighth note group. The reason I do this often is I don't want to be worrying about my tremolo technique while I'm learning the piece. So often I will kind of practice the piece in this way, so I learn all the chord shapes and I know the melody, but I'm not necessarily doing the tremolo right away. That way you can just like learn the piece without the complication of the tremolo. Because so often a student will come into me and they've been practicing the piece, but the tremolo is so difficult for them that they haven't actually worked on the musical piece, like the musical composition. They've just been really struggling with like the tremolo. So you can separate those things. You can practice your tremolo as a technique, and then you can also practice this piece of music really beautifully, and making sure that like some of those non-chord tones resolve nicely, like making sure like that C resolves to the B. And you can work on all those things without the complication. And then I'll often play it as a triplet pattern. So I'll play the bass and the upper note at the same time, followed by a triplet. I do that partly because there's sometimes a gap between my thumb and my A finger in terms of the evenness of my tremolo, and so practicing it like that is really great for me because it's almost like practicing a plant in this finger, like where that finger would be touching the string before it has to play, so much so that I'm playing the two notes at the same time. It kind of trains my hand to like really make sure that my A finger has the muscle memory of being there quickly. That way when I switch to, there's not too much of a gap between those two fingers. Again, it's a great way to practice the piece as well without, solely focusing on the tremolo. After I've done those things, I will progress to playing it, an actual tremolo in tremolo fashion. And then once I've done all those things during my practice sessions, each practice session I will work on each of those things back to back. So just playing the melody on its own, and then playing just this, and then playing triplets, and then finally, and that gives me just a little bit more confidence, and also just gets me into the piece really well. And prepared to go. So let's just do a walkthrough of the piece now to just talk about a couple of fingering ideas that I've added to the piece, because for the most part, I keep Sagreras' fingerings, but I do change a number of them. So I'll go a little bit slower here. That's a nice slide down with two, easy. I use the third finger here. I'm using the third finger on A. That that way the second finger can grab this E more easily. I just don't have to like worry about releasing something and jumping. You can see my second finger can be ready to grab that. This is great because your fourth finger just stays down during that shift, making it nice and easy. I'm using the fourth finger there because I want my third finger available for this C. Not too much to discuss. A little bit more bass interest here where the melody goes somewhat static before taking over again. I'm using my third finger there just because my second finger was in use just before. So I'm just using my third there and sliding it up. This is repeated material. Sorry. Still repeated material until here. So I'm playing this in 7th position, and then I am just jumping the second finger up. So just make it a special moment so you can combine the technical difficulty of that shift with the musicality of making it a special moment. Pretty straightforward slides down there with the fourth finger secure, right? I use my fourth finger on F here. That way 1 and 2 goes here and then can just shift into this bar. And then just slide up to E. And then some harmonics at the end. So that's just over the 12th fret. Make sure you're right over that fret. You touch the strings but you don't push down. You get that harmonic. Keep in mind that Sagreras does mention this as tremolo technique, so he is writing a tremolo piece here, but he did include a number of different fingerings you can follow, and he did put a tempo of larghetto on there. So he is probably imagining a number of different, maybe tempos to this piece. Maybe some are a little bit slower. And to tell you the truth, as far as tremolo pieces go, this one sounds quite lovely at slower tempos, making it a really excellent starter piece for tremolo. It's still, challenging, but just in terms of the left hand and the length of the piece, making it an excellent developmental piece for tremolo, and also just a beautiful piece of music that's really lovely. So I hope you enjoy it, and it also brings you further along your journey in terms of tremolo technique.